The shuttle rattled so violently that the overhead lights flickered, a dull metallic groan vibrating through every bolt and seam. Jack Harker sat rigid in his seat, knuckles white as he gripped the armrest, not from fear of crashing but from the gnawing certainty that the world waiting below would be worse than anything he'd left behind. Paraxis 4 loomed through the viewports, an angry wasteland of red dunes and jagged black ridges. They called it Hell's Forge, and the name wasn't poetic exaggeration. The air itself shimmered with toxic heat, and the crags were said to house predators that even corporate shock troops avoided. Somewhere in that scorched expanse, the Alliance trained its deadliest mercenaries. Somewhere down there, Jack was going to gamble what was left of his life for a chance at freedom. The announcement came in a mechanical snarl from the shuttle's AI. Final approach to Hell's Forge. All recruits prepare for disembarkation. Jack glanced around. Every other passenger was alien-scaled, furred, or armored in carapace, each one avoiding his gaze. They knew what he was, the lone human, the outsider. The debt collectors who'd hounded him across systems would never follow him here. Not even the greediest bounty hunter risked tangling with Forge security. That was the only comfort. The rest was fire and blood. The shuttle slammed into the landing pad with a bone-jarring thud. Heat surged in as the hatch hissed open, carrying the reek of scorched metal and sulfur. Recruits filed out, boots clanging against steel. Jack followed, his armor catching the first punishing rays of Paraxis's twin suns. Standing before them was a figure who seemed carved out of the very stone of this world. A tall, gaunt alien with skin stretched taut over corded muscle, two crimson eyes glowing with disdain. "I am Sergeant Krell," the alien barked, his voice grinding like rock slides. "For the next 12 weeks, I own your lives. Every breath, every drop of sweat, every scream belongs to me. Fail me, and you won't even earn the privilege of dying in combat. You'll rot in the sand." The recruits stiffened. Jack forced himself to stand tall, locking his gaze forward. He could feel Krell's attention like a blade scraping against his spine as the sergeant stalked the line, inspecting each candidate. When Krell stopped in front of him, the air seemed to tighten. "Well, well," Krell murmured, lips curling into something between a sneer and a predator's grin. "A human. How quaint. The directors must be scraping the bottom of the evolutionary barrel." He leaned in close, a stench of sulfur clinging to his breath. "Tell me, human, do you understand me? Or are you still beating rocks together to make fire?" Jack's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed even. "I understand perfectly, Sergeant. Just waiting for orders." The red eyes narrowed to slits. Silence stretched until it was unbearable. Then Krell straightened. "Orders, is it? You'll have them. Twice as harsh as the rest. Cannon fodder at best. That's all humanity has ever been. Let's see if you prove me wrong before you die." He turned away sharply, addressing the squad with a roar that shook the pad. "You have 2 minutes to stow your gear and report to the training yard. Anyone late will run until their hearts give out. Move!" The recruits scattered like prey. Before a storm, Jack jogged with the rest toward the prefab barracks, each stride pounding with the weight of Krell's vow. He had not come here to be broken. He had come to endure, to adapt, and to prove, if only to himself, that humanity wasn't cannon fodder. That was the only way out of debt, out of failure, out of being hunted. Behind him, Krell's voice echoed across the compound, low and full of menace. "Enjoy your first breaths, human. They may be the last you take freely." Jack didn't look back. He carried the words like a challenge. Hell's Forge wanted to crush him. Krell promised to break him. He would give them both the fight of their lives. The training yard of Hell's Forge sprawled like a battlefield designed by sadists. Jagged climbing walls jutted skyward like broken teeth. Flame vents hissed, spitting gouts of fire at random intervals. Automated turrets perched on steel pylons, tracking every flicker of movement with unblinking lenses. Even the ground itself seemed treacherous, riddled with pits and electrified grates. The air smelled of ozone and scorched metal, and the heat pressed down on the recruits until sweat dripped into their eyes before the first command was even given. Jack Harker took it all in with the wary calm of a man who'd already survived worse. A dozen deployments in the Terran Defense Force had taught him one truth: environments killed faster than bullets if you underestimated them. He let his eyes trace the course, already picking out potential cover, bottlenecks, and vulnerabilities. In the machinery beside him, a squid-like recruit muttered a prayer in a language Jack didn't know, while others shifted uneasily, tails lashing or mandibles clicking in dread. Sergeant Krell stood at the center of it all, red eyes gleaming with cruel delight. "This is your assessment," he thundered, voice echoing off steel and stone. "Reach the end alive. That is the only objective. The course is armed with 26 active defense systems. Do not beg for mercy. The Forge has none to give." A ripple of nervous whispers swept through the ranks. One alien hissed under its breath, "This is insane. We'll be slaughtered." Krell's snarl cut them off. "And to make things interesting," he added, voice dripping venom, "one of you has been selected for a demonstration." His gaze swept the line like a predator, choosing prey before locking on Jack. Human, front and center. Every eye turned to him. Some recruits looked relieved, others smug, and a few, like the reptilian female Jack had bumped into earlier, watched with wary interest. Jack stepped forward, jaw tight, and stopped before Krell. "The human will run the course first," Krell declared, but not alone. He gestured sharply, and a maintenance droid rolled forward. Except this one had been twisted into something darker. Extra plating reinforced its frame. Twin plasma cannons gleamed at its shoulders, and serrated blades snapped out from one arm. Its optical sensors glowed red as it powered up with a menacing hum. Krell's grin stretched thin. Combat scenario. "The droid is programmed to terminate you before you reach the finish. Maximum difficulty settings." A murmur of protest rippled among the recruits. Lieutenant Nix stepped forward from the sidelines, her golden eyes flashing. "Sergeant, that exceeds first-day safety protocols." Krell silenced her with a raised clawed hand. "Perhaps for lesser species, Lieutenant. But humans boast about their adaptability, don't they? Let's see it in action." Jack caught Nix's eye. For the first time, her carefully measured expression cracked, revealing a flicker of concern. He gave a faint shrug, trying to project a confidence he didn't fully feel. "Ready when you are, Sergeant." Krell blinked, his smile faltering for just a heartbeat at Jack's lack of hesitation. Then he bared his teeth. "Begin on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Mark." The course came alive with lethal intent. Sirens blared. Turrets swiveled. Plasma barrels charging. Flame vents belched fire. And the combat droid thundered forward, heavy footfalls pounding the steel like war drums. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted. The first plasma blast scorched the ground behind him, close enough to sear his armor. He dove into a roll, came up behind a barricade, and let his instincts take over. The Forge wanted to kill him. Krell wanted to break him. Both would have to settle for disappointment. Every step was a calculation. Every move a gamble. And in that crucible of fire and steel, Jack Harker began to show them all why humanity had clawed its way up from the dirt to the stars. The sun bled crimson across the horizon as the recruits were herded onto a stripped-down shuttle. Its hull rattled and groaned, barely airworthy, but the sergeant insisted it would be more than enough to deliver you to your doom. Jack strapped himself in without comment, feeling the familiar flutter in his gut that always came before a drop. Not fear, anticipation. The others around him weren't so calm. The squid-like Mulo clutched the straps with twitching tentacles, while Drex, the hulking four-armed brute who sneered at everyone, cracked his knuckles as if he could intimidate. The atmosphere itself. Sergeant Krell stood at the front, talons wrapped around the support rail. His voice grated like stone on steel. Tonight's exercise is survival. You will navigate the caustic flats to the extraction point, 15 kilometers north. You get a survival pack, nothing more. The flats contain toxins, predators, and terrain that will happily consume your bones. Consider this your first taste of the Forge's true lessons. Lieutenant Nix moved down the aisle, her braids swinging behind her as she handed each recruit a compact environmental analyzer. When she reached Jack, her fingers brushed his palm. Her voice was crisp, professional, but her eyes lingered. Your metabolism reacts differently to Paraxian toxins. Be cautious. Jack arched a brow. Concerned about me, Lieutenant? A flicker of humor touched her mouth before it vanished again. Concerned about equipment loss. You've already destroyed one droid. The shuttle jolted violently as it touched down. The hatch hissed open, releasing a tide of cold mist glowing faintly blue from phosphorescent fungi scattered across the barren plain. Jagged rocks rose like teeth in the distance, and the air stank of metal and rot. Move, Krell barked. Those still aboard in 30 seconds fail the course. Jack descended with Mulo and a reptilian female named Tess, the mist curling around their boots like hungry fingers. Drex and most of the recruits turned immediately into the low-lying fog, dismissing the danger warnings. Jack eyed the shifting vapor uneasily. Stick to the ridge, he advised his small group. Less mist up high. Or more predators, Tess hissed, scales bristling. But she followed. They climbed the ridge, the mist thinning as they gained height. Mulo wheezed beside Jack, tentacles trembling. My kind evolved in oceans. This land is unkind. Jack offered a steadying hand, pulling him up. Then we moved slower, together. The analyzer beeped sharply pocket of concentrated toxins ahead. Jack angled them around it, careful and deliberate. Then the night split with a shriek that cut to the bone. Shapes moved in the fog below stalkers. Arachnid beasts with translucent shells, and far too many eyes, herding Drex's group like cattle. Plasma fire flared as panicked recruits tried to fight back. One went down, writhing as acid secretions ate through armor. They're driving them into a kill zone, Jack realized, scanning his analyzer. A toxic pocket pulsed ahead of the flailing recruits. Not our problem, Mulo said nervously. Our orders. Jack was already moving downhill. Orders won't matter if you're dead. We help. He charged into the mist. A stalker lunged, fangs dripping with sizzling saliva. Jack met it head-on, tackling the thing into a cluster of glowing fungi. The impact burst a cloud of spores, and the creature screeched, flailing backward. Jack's eyes widened. The spores. They repel. Them, then use it. Tess shouted, whipping her tail through another fungus patch, spraying glowing dust into the swarm. Mulo staggered forward, dragging an injured recruit out of the mist. Jack smeared glowing paste across his armor, the light shimmering like war. Paint. The stalkers faltered, circling but unwilling to press through the spores. Drex, bloodied but alive, glared at Jack as he coated himself with the luminous substance. You saved us, he growled, disbelief heavy in his voice. Jack shrugged, catching his breath. On Earth, some plants do the same thing. I just took a chance. Tess studied him with new respect. A chance that kept us breathing. As the recruits regrouped on the ridge, a shadow detached itself from the rocks. Lieutenant Nix. Her golden eyes caught the glow of the spores as she approached. "Impressive improvisation," she said quietly, her voice meant for him alone. "Sergeant Krell expected half of them to be thinned tonight. You've disappointed him." Jack wiped spore paste from his cheek. Sorry to ruin his plans. On the contrary. Her gaze lingered on him in the mistlight. "I think you're becoming less of a disappointment by the hour, Harker." She vanished back into the darkness, leaving Jack with the sense he'd just passed a test he hadn't known existed. The caustic flats stretched ahead, glowing and treacherous. But for the first time since arrival, Jack felt the weight of eyes on him, not with contempt, but with respect. The clang of the mess hall's alarm yanked the recruits from their bunks long before dawn. Jack dragged on his boots, muscles aching. From the previous night's gauntlet across the flats, no one had slept much. Acid burn still scarred armor, and the memory of stalkers prowling the mist clung like a shadow. But Sergeant Krell didn't believe in recovery days. They assembled in the training yard under the pale blue light of Paraxis's third moon, still hanging stubbornly above the horizon. Krell paced before them, eyes glinting like coals. "Corporate battlefields," he rasped, "do not care about your excuses. You may find yourself stripped of weapons, stripped of tech. Survival then depends on whether you can turn nothing into something lethal." He let the words hang, then snapped his claws. "Today's exercise, improvised armament. You will be locked in the resource chamber with only the mundane. 10 minutes. When the door opens, you will present me a weapon capable of killing." The chamber sealed with a hydraulic hiss, plunging the recruits into a dim-lit storeroom. Metal. Shelving sagged under piles of maintenance tools, rags, cleaning chemicals, and crates of spare uniforms. Nothing obvious. No blades, no guns, no explosives. The panic started instantly. Tess darted for a rod and began sharpening one end against the floor until sparks leapt. Drex simply ripped a steel shelf from its bolts and bent it into a crude cudgel with a grunt of satisfaction. Mulo uncoiled his tentacles around 2 containers of solvent and muttered something about chemical reactions. Everyone else scavenged frantically, the clamor of tearing cloth, snapping wood, and clanging metal echoing off the walls. Jack didn't rush. He crouched near the hygiene station, eyes narrowing on the most overlooked item there, a standard issue. Toothbrush. His hand closed around the handle, fingers curling with familiarity. He grabbed a maintenance file from the shelf and sat cross-legged on the floor. While the chamber descended into chaos, he began to grind plastic against steel in steady, rhythmic strokes. The handle tapered, edges sharpening with each drag. Drex loomed over him after a while, 4 massive arms full of bent metal. "What in the void are you doing, human?" Jack didn't look up. "Making a shank." "A what?" "Improvised stabbing. Weapon. Simple, reliable, prison classic." He tested the tip against his thumb. Not sharp enough yet. He kept filing, sparks dancing. Drex snorted, shaking his ridged head. "That toy will snap before you scratch armor." Jack wrapped cloth around the base for grip, fashioned a crude guard from bent scrap, and flicked his eyes up briefly. "Not. If you know where to stick it." The buzzer blared. "Time's up." The door screeched open. Sergeant Krell stood waiting, Nix at his side, her expression unreadable. One by one, recruits displayed their creations: spear, club, chemical vial, all. Odal, but predictable. Krell gave curt nods. Then Jack stepped forward, toothbrush shank in hand. The silence was immediate. Krell's lips peeled back in what might have been a grin. "A toothbrush? You mock this exercise?" "Permission to demonstrate, sir," Jack said evenly. Krell's eyes narrowed, but he gestured toward the armored dummy. "By all means, show us your hygiene weapon." Jack circled the dummy slowly, speaking as he moved. Armor always has weaknesses. Seams, joints, optics. A bigger weapon isn't always the answer. Precision is. In one sudden lunge, he drove. A hardened point into the gap between gorget and helmet. A shank slid cleanly through. Gasps rippled across the yard. Jack withdrew and struck again, eye slit, armpit seam, behind the knee, each stab swift, surgical, and devastatingly efficient dot. When he stepped back, the dummy bore 3 fatal wounds in the space his armor couldn't guard. Jack twirled the toothbrush between his fingers, calm as if he'd just demonstrated a drill. The best weapon is the one you have when you need it, and the smallest tool can go where nothing else can. For the first time, Sergeant Krell didn't sneer. He reached forward, plucked the shank from Jack's hand, and tested the tip against his own claw. A bead of dark blood welled, and his crimson eyes flared. Primitive, he growled, but his tone carried a grudging weight. Yet effective. He shoved it back into Jack's palm. Remember this, recruits. Sophistication does not win wars. Adaptation does. As they were dismissed, Jack caught Nyx's gaze. Her golden eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary, lips curving into the faintest smile. Resourceful, she murmured as she passed, and dangerous. An intriguing combination, Harker. He slipped the shank into his belt. Primitive or not, it had made the alien sergeant bleed. And that was worth more than any weapon forged in a factory. The compound had gone quiet, but Jack knew better than to believe in peace. At Hell's Forge, silence was never a gift, it was a test. Another layer of pressure meant to crack recruits. Already worn to the bone, the barracks hummed with exhausted snores when his datapad vibrated under his pillow. He thumbed it open, squinting at the glowing text. Training, Field C 2,300 hours. Come alone. And his gaze flicked across the mess hall where he'd eaten earlier. Lieutenant Nyx had sat among the other instructors, posture perfect, expression unreadable. She hadn't so much as looked at him. Yet here was the message. Got a secret admirer, human? Drex had teased earlier, 4 arms juggling food trays like they weighed nothing. Jack had brushed it off as extra drills, but Drex's chuckle and knowing look still rang in his ears. Not at 2,300 sharp, Jack slipped through the shadows of the compound. Training Field C lay on the far edge, nestled against jagged volcanic rock. No floodlights burned here, only the cold glow of Paraxis's 3 moons, crimson, amber, and pale blue. Their overlapping light painted the yard in surreal hues. She was waiting. Nyx stood in the center of the field, her emerald blue skin luminous beneath the moons, silver braid spilling over her shoulder. Gone was the bulky officer's armor. She wore a fitted training suit that moved like a second skin, showing the lithe lines of a body honed by discipline and battle. She didn't speak immediately, only studied him with those golden eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted revealed. Lieutenant, Jack said, stopping a few paces away. Nyx, she corrected softly. This isn't official. He raised a brow. Then what is it? She didn't answer. Instead, she tossed him a combat staff. He caught it, the polished wood cool in his palms. Humans, she began, circling him slowly. Compensate for deficiencies with other strengths, limited night vision, weaker respiratory tolerance. Yet you adapt. I want to see how. Is this for your report to Sergeant Krell? Jack asked. A small smile touched her lips. Krell doesn't know I'm here. This is personal research. Before he could reply, the field plunged into near darkness as she triggered the lights to cut. The moons became the only illumination, painting. Shadows sharp and strange. Begin, her voice whispered from somewhere to his left. The first strike caught his shoulder, a stinging crack that jolted through him. He swung wide, finding only air. Her laugh was soft, amused. 1 point. Jack steadied his breathing, shutting his eyes for a moment. If sight was useless, he'd rely on something else. The whisper of air, the crunch of boots on grit, the faint sound of her inhaling. He pivoted and swung. The staff cracked against something solid. A sharp intake of breath confirmed the hit. Impressive, she admitted. The duel became dance. She darted like a shadow, striking fast and vanishing. He adapted, listening, predicting, turning instinct into weapon. Sweat rolled down his spine, muscles burning, but exhilaration thrummed through him. With each exchange, the fight felt less like combat and more like play. An hour later, they collapsed onto a black rock outcropping, panting. She offered him a canteen, their hands brushing as he took it. Moonlight bathed her skin in cool radiance, her eyes molten gold against the pale glow. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" He asked, sipping. "Humans have a reputation. Aggressive, primitive, loud." Her gaze softened. "But you're nuanced." Jack allowed himself a smile. "We contain multitudes." Nick studied him, thoughtful. "That shank you made, it wasn't just clever, it was elegant. Most would have tried for something grand. You chose precision. Effectiveness over appearance," he said simply. "The wheel, the lever, the knife. The simplest tools changed everything." She reached out, tracing the scar along his forearm, the one a stalker had left. Her touch was cool, electric. "Curiosity," she murmured. "Fascination. Perhaps attraction." Jack's heart hammered. Regulation screamed against this. But he leaned closer anyway. Their lips brushed tentatively, then deepened, the connection sparking like static across bare wires. For a moment, the galaxy shrank to just two beings beneath 3 alien moons. Then the alarm ripped the night apart. A shrill, rising wail that shattered the stillness. Both sprang to their feet, staffs forgotten. "That's the perimeter breach alert," Nick said, already sprinting toward the compound. Jack fell into stride beside her, pulse still racing from more than the kiss. "This conversation isn't over," he muttered. Her golden eyes flicked to his, fierce and alive. "No," she agreed. "It's just beginning." They raced back under the moonlight, two shadows moving as one toward the firestorm waiting. At Hell's Forge, the compound was a storm of red light and chaos when Jack and Nix burst through the gates. Sirens wailed from every tower, and emergency strobes painted the yard in frantic pulses. Recruits scrambled in half-fastened armor, shouting over the shriek of klaxons as security officers tried to wrestle order from panic. Hostiles breached. "The eastern fence," a voice barked over the combs. 20, maybe more corporate-grade weaponry. Sergeant Krell stood in the center like a stone idol, his red eyes blazing as he directed squads with clipped, brutal efficiency. When he saw Jack and Nix, his expression twisted in irritation. "Lieutenant Armory, distribute rifles. Now." "Yes, Sergeant." Nix snapped to attention, but her gaze lingered on Jack for the briefest heartbeat before she sprinted away. Krell closed the distance in 2 strides, shoving a combat blade into Jack's hand. "Take position 3. The toothbrush won't cut it tonight." Jack smirked, despite the adrenaline boiling in his veins. "I'll keep it as backup, sir." For just a moment, the corner of Krell's mouth twitched, almost a smile, before he spun away to bellow more orders. Jack sprinted across the yard toward defensive position 3, where Drex and Tess were already crouched behind a barricade of overturned crates. Mulo cowered in the corner, tentacles wrapped tight around a pulse rifle. Plasma fire cracked overhead as the first wave of attackers surged through the breach sleek. Black-armored soldiers with Nexus Dynamics logo glowing faintly on their chests. Mercenaries. Tess hissed, her scaled crest flaring. "Saraxian! By the way they move. Why attack here?" Jack muttered, peering through the smoke. Drex fired a volley, 4 arms working in brutal efficiency. They've been trying to steal forge methods for years. Maybe they finally got desperate. But Jack's gut told him different. The mercs weren't targeting the command hub or armory. They were moving with surgical precision toward the barracks. A chill slid through him. They're not after data, he realized aloud. They're after someone. His tongue crackled. Report, Krell demanded. They're bypassing strategic targets and heading straight for the bunks. Jack replied, ducking another barrage. Sergeant, they're hunting personnel. They're hunting me. Silence crackled across the line. Then Krell's voice, low and dangerous. Command center. Now. Jack vaulted the barricade, weaving through bursts of plasma fire until he skidded into the command hub. Screens lit the room, showing every corner of the compound. Nix stood over the console, golden eyes sharp, while Krell stabbed a claw at one feed. On the display, a Syraxian commander barked orders to his squad. Helmet off, his ridged face and scarred mandibles marked him unmistakably. Ven Talon, Nix said grimly. Head of Nexus Acquisition. He never leads field ops unless it's high priority. Krell's jaw tightened. And the priority is you, Harker, your performance metrics. Jack stared at the data scrolling across another screen. Obstacle course times, survival records, the Shank demonstration. Every achievement logged, catalogued, stolen. They want to acquire you, Nix said, bitterness in her tone. Nexus doesn't recruit. They take. Jack exhaled slowly, heart hammering. Then let's give them what they want. Krell's eyes narrowed. A trap? Exactly. Jack jabbed at the schematic of the barracks. They expect me hiding there. We make it look real. When they come, we spring the net. Nix leaned closer, voice low but fierce. You'll have to sell it, if Talon suspects. He won't, Jack said. He slid the toothbrush shank from his belt, its sharpened tip glinting under the red lights. Besides, I've got a reputation. Now. Minutes later, Jack crouched behind his bunk in the dim barracks, shank clutched in one hand, pulse pounding like a war drum. Through his earpiece, he heard the hunter's coming heavy boots, hushed commands. The door hissed open. Armored shadows fanned out. A voice smooth as oil filled the silence. Harker, Nexus Dynamics would like to discuss your future employment. Come willingly, and you'll be rewarded. Resist, and a pause, the sound of a weapon charging. Well, we'll still take you. Jack pressed his cone twice, signal sent. The trap was ready. He waited until Talon stepped close, visor gleaming inches away. Then he lunged, driving the toothbrush. Shank into the seam between collar and helmet, exactly where he'd demonstrated days before. Talon staggered back with a snarl of shock as the lights blazed on and Krell's voice thundered from the coms. Now. Hidden panels burst open, recruits and guards flooding in with weapons raised. Plasma bolts cut through the air. A nexus. Mercs froze, surrounded, their leader bleeding from a wound carved by a toothbrush. Jack straightened, twirling the shank between his fingers. Sometimes the simplest solution is the deadliest. Talon's eyes burned with fury as he spat blood onto the floor. This isn't over, human. Jack didn't flinch. No, he said evenly. It's just starting. The smoke still hung heavy over Hell's Forge when dawn finally broke. The compound reeked of ozone and scorched alloy, its walls scarred with the night's battle. Fires smoldered in the distance, casting long shadows across the training yard where exhausted. Recruits slumped against barricades. The attack had been beaten back, but the air buzzed with the raw aftertaste of war. Jack stood in the command center, sweat drying on his skin, armor pitted with scorch marks. The toothbrush shank its tip dark with Syraxian blood rested at his belt. Krell lay on a med slab nearby, his gray skin paling to ash, crimson eyes flickering like dying embers. Nyx knelt at his side, her usually unshakable poise cracked by urgency. "Stay with us, Sergeant," she urged, pressing a patch. To the wound, Krell's breath rattled, a sound like gravel sliding down stone. His gaze locked on Jack. "The Forge survives. That is what matters." His claw trembled as he fumbled with the insignia at his collar, a steel emblem, tarnished with age and war. He shoved it into Jack's palm, fingers cold. "You are commander now." Jack froze, the weight of the symbol like iron in his fist. "Sergeant, don't waste it," Krell rasped. Then, with a final exhale, the fire bled from his eyes. Silence fell heavy as a shroud. Nyx bowed her head, braid falling like a curtain of silver over her face. Jack tightened his fist around the insignia, every muscle rigid. Krell had spent weeks trying to break him, calling him primitive, cannon fodder. And in the end, he trusted him with everything. The klaxons wailed again. Multiple Nexus shuttles incoming. A security officer shouted from the console. "They're not retreating. They're doubling down." Jack straightened, voice cold steel. "Evacuate the wounded. Everyone else fall back to positions Alpha through Delta. We're not losing the Forge." Recruits looked to him, uncertain. He raised the insignia high, its gleam catching the light. "You heard your commander. Move." The hesitation broke. Squads snapped into motion, obeying without question. The battle that followed was unlike anything Hell's Forge had ever endured. Nexus mercenaries stormed through breached walls, expecting to overwhelm. Instead, they found corridors rigged with improvised trap-straining weights swung as crushing. Pendulums, gas canisters turned into smoke bombs, even electrified wires strung across choke points. Recruits fought not like soldiers, but like survivors, using every scrap, every trick, every lesson Jack had burned into them. Drex smashed enemies, aside with a repurposed steel girder. Tess lashed her tail through smoke, her rifle precise. Mulo deployed his volatile chemical brews, turning hallways into death traps. And everywhere, Jack moved like a phantom, blade in one hand, toothbrush shank in the other. He wasn't the strongest, wasn't the fastest, but every strike found a seam. Every move turned the enemy's arrogance against them. By sunrise, the Nexus forces lay broken. Dozens of mercenaries knelt in restraint fields, weapons scattered. Ven Talon, his armor scorched and pride shattered, glared at Jack as he was dragged past. "This will haunt you, human. Nexus doesn't forgive." Jack twirled the shank once, letting its simple plastic catch the light. "Then they'll learn what a toothbrush can do." 3 months later, the Forge had been rebuilt. The scars of battle remained etched in steel, but the compound thrummed with new energy. A fresh transport descended onto the landing pad, carrying wide-eyed recruits of every species, and for the first time, 3 humans among them. Commander Jack Harker stood waiting, insignia gleaming on his chest, Nyx at his side in the crisp uniform of Lieutenant Commander. The recruits lined up nervously, the heat of Paraxis 4 already baking into their bones. Jack let silence stretch before speaking. "Welcome to Hell's Forge," he said at last, voice carrying across the yard. "You've come here expecting weapons, tactics, technology, and you'll get those. But the first lesson is this: the universe doesn't care how advanced your gear is. It rewards those who adapt." He drew the toothbrush shank from his belt and held it high. Confused murmurs rippled through the line. Nyx's lips curved in the faintest smile as Jack's eyes hardened. "On your first day," he continued, "you will each craft one of these. A tool so simple, so unassuming, you'll think it a joke. But by the time you leave here, you'll understand. This is not just a weapon. It's a reminder that survival belongs to those who can turn nothing into something lethal. The recruits straightened, some skeptical, others intrigued. Behind them, the twin suns rose over Paraxis 4, casting long shadows across the yard. Jack closed his hand around the shank, feeling again the weight of Krell's trust, Nyx's gaze. Steady beside him, and the fire of humanity's oldest lesson burning in his chest. Adapt, improvise, overcome. And in that crucible of red sand and blood, a new tradition of Hell's Forge was born.